Welcome back! I've clearly been so far away from this lecture, and you might not have just immediately pressed next and gone to the next video. But anyway, this time we are going to get additional context, and I'm sorry on how squeaky the chair is. It just is. I haven't been able to figure out how to edit it because it's life. I try and not move, but I'm not the best at not moving. So yeah, this time we are going to talk about some additional context to the person versus situation debate and how that flavors the book, as well as it will explain that big burning question you have of why is someone who has a PhD in quantitative psychology teaching this class. Okay, so for a certain generation of personality psychologists, the person-situation debate is deeply personal, and often this time is considered a dark age in their field, our field. So for this generation, which David Funder is a part of, most of their careers were spent fighting to demonstrate that personality was relevant, that it was worthy of study, and they had to compete with their like-minded peers for very few academic jobs. And often those who did survive this really bad job market did so by hiding in other disciplines. So you'll notice that that many of that generation are either clinical psychologists or quantitative psychologists, so methodologists / psychometricians who specialize in measurement. There are also like a handful of behavior geneticists too. So it shouldn't surprise you why you have a quantitative psych. Like, this is why. I was trained by some individual differences people. My advisor has a PhD in quantitative from UNC and specialized in intelligence, quantitative methodology, and his specialization, if you had to ask me to pick one, is the correlation. But yeah, so that's it. It really colored this generation's entire careers, and so from this, almost from the 60s to the 90s, like that's a whole generation of career that was just they had to argue that their area, that their subfield was relevant and real. I have never had to argue that for quantitative psychology, ever. I've never had to debate that statistics for psychology was worthy of study, that causal inference using like genetics was worthy of study. Never. I have never had to do that. I've had some pushback on like, why do you use genetically informed designs and not some other thing? But that's a question of like design, not that. It's not a question of, well, causal inference. Like, it's not a question like causal inference. Oh, why would we care about causation? I've never had to deal with that. I'm very grateful because people like David Funder paved the road and gave they worked. I can't even. Okay, so I'm just going to go on to the next slide to give you some sense of how just devastating it was. Because essentially, if you were a personality psychologist during this time, there were a handful of jobs. And so your peers, so your friends, your colleagues, those that like agreed with you that personality was valuable and valid, you had to compete against them. And your success came at their failure. It's horrifying. All right, so here is what the job market looked like 20 years after. This is the best snapshot I could get. There's not a ton of great data on job market information from pre-2008 for the most part, but this snapshot exists. So if you look at, there are 5.5 thousand jobs for all of the academic jobs. So everyone who graduates with their PhD applies for jobs, as well as those professors who would like to move or things like that. So there are 5.5 thousand jobs. And see, do I have my animation? And this is about 20 years after the start. Like, so this is, we're in recovery here. Okay, so are we gonna, can I have my animation? Okay, so here's personality psychology. There are, that's 2%. Right here. 2% of all jobs. Less than 100. To put it in perspective, quantitative psychology, so my specialization, which is way more rare. It is the less, like there are maybe 25 quantitative psychology programs. There's a Wikipedia page that I work on occasion, so it's more than 25, but quantitative psychology is like a super small specialized field. And yet there were 3 times as many jobs. 5% of all jobs were quantitative psychology jobs. Social psych, which is kind of the contrast to personality, twice as many as quantitative. So about 10% of all psychology jobs were social, and less than 2% were personality. And these were comparable sized fields in terms of jobs. And so if we zoom in on personality and look at the specific kinds of jobs, 2/3 of those jobs are assessment. So they're essentially quantitative measurement jobs. So there are 30 jobs over a 5-year period. That is 6 per year for an entire field where most programs will graduate, 5 to 10 PhDs a year. There are so many more people than jobs. Like, this number is, I can't even articulate how low it is. And so, like, maybe there'd be 5 jobs on the market that you would be competitive with. So you're applying against 100 people. So, like, and I know, so just to clarify, David Funder, he is fantastic. He's been cited almost 10,000 times since 2014. It's been increased since it. So, like, without a doubt, like, as much as I grumble, I do so with respect. I picked his book because it is fantastic. The fact that I have minor gripes, that's more me just always, I have minor gripes about everything, and he's great. Fantastic. I cannot articulate enough how badass this man is, because he survived the job onslaught. Full stop. He spent his career arguing that personality psychology is worthy of existing, and demonstrating it over and over again. Over and over and over again. It really was the heart of all his early work, that his field was worthy of existing. And I'm very grateful that he did that, because by having a content interest in like, I never had to justify it. I've never had to debate, does personality exist? And so most of the time now, I think I'll end up talking about this later, but I'll talk about it. So now, those that, from his generation of career made it, they still kind of debate it amongst themselves, which I totally get, because it's just, it wiped out everything. I imagine that the academic job market right now, if the handful of academics that get jobs are going to have that same kind of, like, not shell shock, but like, it's going to color their careers. So he graduated in 1979 from Stanford, and he was mentored by 2 super well-established individual differences people, Jack Block and Daryl Bem. And this paper, in Psych Review is fantastic. Like, to get this paper, like, he wrote this while he was still in grad school and got it published while still in grad school. It's a really good paper, and it is really hard to publish in top-tier journals while a graduate student. And so, just to emphasize how badass David Funder is, while in grad school, he's having to defend his field. He's having to try and apply for jobs, and he gets a paper published successfully arguing that personality exists in the biggest, like, one of the biggest major journals of our field. I know that you guys are probably like, why is this lady still talking about this? It's really impressive. It's really impressive. Alright, so that's a bit about David Funder. I'm going to talk about Walter Mischel here to give you some context on both of these people. So they're kind of like the anchors that we're going to use. Now, there's obviously a lot more people in this debate, but for a, like, memory device and just, like, being able to manage the nuance of the argument, I'm picking two people. The other person, Walter Mischel. And so he's an Austrian-born Jewish refugee. He was born in 1930 in Vienna. His family fled to New York in 1938. And you've probably seen these illustrations, but his early research was on the marshmallow test, which is viewed as evidence that self-control is predictive. So he studied individual differences a lot. The marshmallow test is predictive of long-term behavior. But his research kind of gets a little away from him, and his general goal, fairly recent, he's passed since this article was written, about what his goals were with psychology. What my life has been about is showing the potential for human beings to not be victims of their biography. To illustrate that the situation that they're born into, the kind of things they inherit, not just genetically, but environmentally, they're not deterministic. And I totally get it, as my grandma is a Romanian refugee, so she's a generation after Michelle. And, oh, I love her dearly, but she went through some rough things. And so I encourage you to check this out. But Walter Mischel is not anti-personality. He's not. And also, David Funder is not anti-social psychology. Sometimes these arguments get lost, but both of these people value the personality. If you looked at the title of David Funder's article, it talked about the personality within the situation. There, he's examining personality and situation together. Walter Mischel is examining personality and situation and demonstrating that you can move beyond those things. And David Funder is... So, like, they aren't that far apart. But it's flavored a lot of personality psychology, and it kind of explains why Funder's got whole chunks of his book about how you can compare experimental designs, which is typically what social psychology used, to correlational designs. It's because of this person-situation debate. Alright, so next time, I'm going to actually tell you what the hell this debate was about. So, what was this debate? So I'm going to wrap up here. I'm trying to keep these short because I know that the personality assessment ones ran a little long. I really try to keep them under 30 minutes, but a couple of them have run over. So it's kind of an apology. I'm slicing these ones up a little more. So yeah, next time we'll actually talk about the debate. Bye bye.